Welcome to the Cloud Native Testing Podcast. I'm Ole Lensmar, your host, and I've spent years building testing tools like SoapUI and Swagger, and now I'm the CTO at Testkube, where we're redefining testing for the cloud native landscape. In this podcast, we invite people in the space to discuss with us the challenges, solutions, and best practices for testing in Kubernetes and beyond, covering automation, CI/CD, GitOps, and more. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Testkube. If you're interested about how to test cloud-native applications and infrastructure, subscribe and stay tuned. Now let's dive into the episode. Thank you for joining. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Cloud Native Testing Podcast. I'm super pleased to be joined by Cherif Sahraoui. I hope I got that right, who's a QA lead at 50Hertz. Cherif, how are you?
Oh, thanks. Welcome, everyone.
It's great to have you here. So please tell us a little bit about your QA lead. What does that mean in the context of cloud native testing and testing in general?
Yeah, first of all, I'm Cherif Sahraoui. I'm working now as a QA lead. I have like 5+ years of experience in testing, test automation. Also worked as a programmer for 1 year. What does this mean? QA lead is actually a role within a project currently for an energy provider in Germany. And basically, we are working on a private cloud infrastructure. We are testing different tools. I have a team of additional 2 QA engineers, and we basically make sure that the quality is in high standard, let's say, of these all tools running in the infrastructure.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And so in the context of cloud native, I don't know if the project that you're in has shifted to cloud native or if it's been cloud native all along. I obviously, from my point of view, have certain opinions about what makes testing cloud native, but I'd love to hear how your experience in how testing is changed maybe for cloud native applications and pipelines.
Yeah, the project I started in actually started cloud native. We are using as provider like GCP, for example, for our Kubernetes engines and so on. But actually, in my project, it's a little bit special. We are shifting into on-prem environments. So there is a lot of reasons like sovereignty, for example, here in Germany, because it's energy sector. Where the company is working, and basically there is a lot of regulations and guidelines you have to take care of. And that's one of the big reasons why they are shifting into their on-prem clusters and infrastructure, basically. And this like type of testing has a lot of challenges. You are not like able always to test stuff, for example, that you are working in locally, because the behavior is totally different on these clusters. The connectivity is different. Sometimes even the performance will not be the same, which actually causes sometimes performance issues that you have to take into account when working on some test automation scripts, for example.
So to me, like an energy provider, it sounds like there's a lot of hardware involved. I don't know if that's true. How do you, I'm guessing you don't have all the hardware available, or do you do hardware testing also? Or kind of how does that play into the things that you're testing specifically?
Yeah, so first of all, this energy company is basically working on digital transformation. So you can think of, there are a lot of plants around Germany and Belgium, and these plants are basically running some applications, and they use cloud hyperscalers like AWS or Azure GCP. And basically what the company wants, or like all these plants they want to build their own infrastructure, and the tools or the stack we are working in will be running basically later on these plants. Now what we are working on is like a bootstrap of all of these tools. And we have to make sure, as QA lead, we have to make sure that these tools run as expected in some of environment we have currently. And later, it is supposed to be running in different plants or different environments. So we have to make sure that we have a lot of automation also when we bootstrap all these tools, that they can be running initially without any issues in all different environments.
Okay, so it sounds to me like you're both doing testing at the infrastructure level then, and then at the application level also. Okay, and I'm just curious about specifically tooling for infrastructure testing. Is this something that you've built yourself because it's very specific to your infrastructure, or are there tools out there that you can use for this kind of thing?
This testing of the infrastructure itself is actually not in our scope. I mean, it is in the project itself, but it is not in my product line where I'm working. My product line is more like into application testing. Yeah. So basically, we have a lot of different tools which are basically meant to be provided for different developers with the whole like company. And these developers are basically, they need, for example, tools to build their code, to deploy it. They have also collaboration tools, let's say Jira, Confluence, and so on. All these tools actually run within Kubernetes, and we have to make sure that the tools are configured correctly with all the restrictions we have in these environments. That's why said there are lots of challenges. For example, the connectivity. These environments will be air-gapped, for example, and you don't have access to the internet, so you have to make sure to configure them correctly so that you can use the images, for example, needed for the handshots of these applications from the correct source, which will be usually a registry instance running in this whole environment.
Okay. Super interesting. So much in here. So I'd like to talk more about. So one thing when I hear like the word QA lead, I'm always thinking a little bit old school. There's a QA team and there's an engineering team, and you throw things over the wall. I'm sure that's not how it is, but how is the integration between dev and QA, and do you see that being different in a cloud native application infrastructure, or is it more about culture and maybe process and people than it is about technology?
I think it's more about culture here. Yeah, it's. I mean, the terminology is not that important, I think, but the daily work, how does it look? For example, for me, we work in Scrum. I mean, model. So we have dailies, for example, and in these days there will be developers and the QA engineers. So we don't differentiate. I mean, in our daily work, but basically what will be different, which tasks you are working on. I mean, and we use Jira, for example, for project management. And the collaboration is very, good. We collaborate a lot, within the team. And as I stated, also, we work a lot with test automation. So there is a lot of programming involved and a lot of coding. All the infrastructure I stated is written as code. We use Terraform, for example, even to run our tools. For example, Testkube itself, let's talk a little bit about it, is actually deployed using Terraform. Basically, you have to think of, this project, we have a lot of environments, and these environments may be different. The configuration or how we run Testkube or which test workflows, for example, should be running in each environment are different. So basically, if you don't have like a central, let's say, Terraform module that deploys all these Testkube instances or agents in the different environments, you have basically to copy paste a lot. And this like very error prone, and you can basically miss a lot of stuff. And it's also a hard, let's say, task that you may.
Super interesting. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. I just want to go back to the QA and developer, because I know from my own experience is that as soon as there's some QA engineers on the development team, the developers themselves sometimes feel like, oh, then I don't have to test as much because they will test it for me. I know that's grossly oversimplifying. I'm just curious, kind of, how do you draw the line from your experience? How do you make sure that developers do their part of testing? Is there a clear contract around what kind of automated tests it's and where does the responsibility go for different types of testing?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's also again a question of mentality and maybe also a culture you have to build like within the team. So first of all, like regarding the testing in the team, we work, as I said, with Jira, and we make sure that each user story we work on should have be QA'd somehow. So that means it should be tested from the developer himself, who worked on it. We call it a unit test, let's say. It depends also on the user story, but we usually also involve QA teams when there is, for example, a follow-up test that should be created for a user story. Then we create a ticket then in Jira, and then we link it to this development user story. So there will be always some QA done, quality assurance done, but it shouldn't be always coming from the QA team. The developers do also some testing. They provide, for example, some screenshots, provide some explanation on the work they have done, the development they have done, to ensure that it is tested.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. So speaking of automated testing, I know that's something I know is dear to your heart. I'm curious to hear more about that. I'm also curious to hear what your thoughts are around exploratory testing as a complement to automated testing, and how do you kind of prioritize between those two, or choose when to use which? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes like the automated testing it is not possible. Yeah. For example, you have tool that you are working on, and the flow that you want to test is basically not possible to be automated. For example, we work with a tool called Backstage, and it's a developer portal, and it is based on different cards. And each card has like a complex workflow in the background. For example, that creates some resources and different tools, like in, let's say, project in Jira or space in Confluence. And sometimes these workflows are actually meant to be tested only once. And it involves a lot of complexity. I mean, if you want to automate it, you have basically to connect to each of these tools involved. And sometimes you don't have even the possibility to get the needed authentication to these tools. So in these scenarios, I think manual testing or exploratory testing makes more sense. Let's say you can basically open the tool, try to find bugs. I mean, try to also imitate the user of the tool, the end user, how he will be using the tool. But test automation is more like for the tasks or the scenarios that are usually can be always like repeated. I mean, in the same you have the same or similar expected outputs or outcomes from the test. In such case, for sure, test automation will spare you a lot of time, also a lot of effort. We have, for example, a big regression test suite for our and whenever we bump the version, for example, or we release the one of the applications, we run this whole like test suite and Testkube.
Even if you have a lot of automated tests, would you still say it's good to do some exploratory testing on top of that? Maybe it depends on the kind of interface. If it's an API, it's one thing. If it's a browser interface, it's different. I mean, to me, I always feel like I love automated tests, but I feel also just getting a critically thinking tester in front of a user interface can do wonders for identifying edge cases and, things that you haven't thought of. What's your experience there?
Yeah, I also agree. I mean, to the last what you said. I mean, exploratory testing, you can't avoid it. I mean, there are a lot of scenarios, edge cases you have to test manually. You should actually also think of sometimes the performance, sometimes the user experience, even like how easy to find, for example, elements in some UI. All of these can't be easily automated, or sometimes it's not good that you automate them. You want basically to try always, like after a release, to check that the behavior is as you wish or as intended. Yeah, so I think this is a topic is also similar to sometimes testing in production, for example. Many people are afraid of this, or it has a bad reputation, but it is also needed somehow to validate that the production environment is as expected, at least like some smoke testing. And this should be always manual. I mean, you can run some automation script in production and you may break stuff or delete stuff, but it's still mandatory. And in this case, you should do it manually. Especially if some UI is involved. This type of test should be manual.
No, so it's funny you bring that up because, I mean, Evan, who's producing the show for listeners, he's been on these recordings for a while now, and he can confirm that almost on every call, the topic of testing and production comes up.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that most people say you shouldn't be doing. It's a little bit late to discover. It's better that you discover your bugs before your customers do. But on the other hand, it's actually quite convenient. And of course, people do synthetic monitoring as a way of where do you draw the line between that and testing in production. But it does seem to me that it's a very common practice to at least have some safety net, or that, just on a schedule every hour, every whatever, run some basic tests, make sure that the core user flows are still working in production. Even if they should be working, you never know what slips through the cracks. And then, especially in a cloud native environment where infrastructure can change, maybe not so much in your case, but in other, if you're using maybe it depends on how close you are to the infrastructure team. Just having something in there to keep your back could be a good way. And like you said, that could even be manually. You could have a person just making sure things work at a regular basis.
But I mean, in summary, testing in production has bad reputation because people think you test only in production, which is not, because it should be just like an additional type of testing. Additionally to all like the lower environments where you tested, you run your automation or performance tests and so on. But then when you reach production, for sure, you have to make sure that the end user will not have, let's say, like crash tool. It will be very bad if, for example, the user will have blue screen or something like that in production. You have to, I mean, I know like in some other projects, we release to production, but the QA team never see it. It's like blindly releasing, and then for sure there were like some bugs or some issues in production. We have been like identified these like easily if we did some tests.
Yeah. No, well, thank you for adding that. Of course, it makes sense in the context of there actually being tests before production as well. So that's, I think, also where it could make sense. But maybe one thing that I want to get back to, specifically what we've seen in the transition to cloud native, is that testing gets more spread out across the entire delivery pipeline. So instead of just doing it as part of maybe your build in CI, you do it like at different phases. Maybe you're doing GitOps, or maybe you're doing progressive delivery, or, depends. The kind of the CD part of CI/CD is become more fluent, maybe, and more event-driven through some modern approaches. And that's also where testing suddenly becomes maybe more important, just to make sure all these moving parts are still aligned and working. Is that something you can relate to on how you guys are doing things?
Yes, let's say like depends on the type of test. I mean, for example, we do have also static testing, static code analysis. For example, we use Sonic. It is also type of test that should be done even like before the integration itself. I mean, maybe locally with some so-called pre-commit hooks that you can basically add to your repository, or also in the pipeline itself as part of the CI pipeline. I mean, moving up and up, I mean, toward the deployment, we do have also testing. For example, let's talk a little bit about Testkube again. Where we use Testkube, we have our CI/CD pipeline, and after the deployment, basically we use ArgoCD as a tool. And after the deployment of any tool, let's say we do a version pump of a tool, Testkube detects that this application is bumped, and then it can logically wait until the ArgoCD deployment is done. This is also possible because you are testing Kubernetes native. So basically you can check what is the status of the ArgoCD application. And then after that, you can, for sure, if the deployment is done and everything is healthy, you can run your tests. So everything is connected. I mean, you can start from like the code static, testing until you do like the dynamic tests for when the application is deployed in the environment.
And if those tests fail, do you roll back automatically, or is that something that's the ones going up Argo?
It's more now like the pipeline itself is failing, so the developer knows at least about this happen, but we don't have like an automated rollback. I mean, it's up to the developer to decide. And usually, I mean, as I said, that this is part of testing when a version pump is done. Usually, we have to check what happened. Sometimes the application itself has a bug. Maybe we have to check then their documentation. We have to check their GitHub, let's say, issues. And then the developer should manually decide.
Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing. It's super interesting just to see how Testkube can be injected in different aspects of a pipeline. I wanted to get back to something you talked about much earlier, about that you're in a very regulated industry. How does that affect testing? How do you kind of make sure you're compliant with whatever regulations are? Or is that part of the testing responsibility, or is that handled differently?
We do have another team, let's say, for compliance and security. They take care more about these topics. But I can recall, for example, SonarQube. We have some rules there that ensure some of the compliance of good code standards and so on. Use these. But I think we try to follow the standards, let's say, on the tool. Sonar.
Okay, thank you. So two more things I was thinking about. So one was around QA metrics and kind of reporting. It's one of those things, there has to be reporting in a product. I'm just curious, kind of, how are reports important to you, and kind of what kind of metrics do you look at as a team for your testing efforts?
Yeah, the most important metric, let's say, the percentage of past test cases, and we do use the test management tool. In our case, it's called TestRail. We use it basically because, yeah, Testkube can provide, for example, some of the visibility of the test runs or the history of the testing. But yeah, there are a lot of teams involved in my project, so we do have this central test management tool. And basically, that's what the management people, let's say, check. Yeah. So, how many tests did we run, and what is the percentage of the past test cases?
Okay.
And if some tests fail, for sure, you have to check also if the needed bugs are created. So we have also some referencing or tracking of the failed test cases. If one test case failed, then each of them should have a bug ticket created.
But do you do over time look at, this team or this project has more, has a lower pass fail ratio or higher than others, or do you look at like trends, or does your management look at trends and try that to you make strategic decisions based on that data?
I mean, the journey, let's say, in this project started now, let's say. But yeah, I think it will be decided in the future. Like, for example, to have a track or a history of the team. I mean, how many tests were failing, if this ratio is going up or down. But until now, we don't have such, say, comparison.
Okay, great. Okay, and then I have to ask you about AI, or I don't have to, but I'm curious. Do you use any AI tooling in related to testing in any way? And what are your thoughts in general about AI in testing?
I mean, not in testing specifically, but we do use large language models. I mean, as most of people do nowadays. Related to testing specifically, we try to explore like some trends.
Mhm.
For example, we do have a lot of UIs involved in our applications, and yeah, we check the latest, let's say, tools in GitHub regularly. I remember we investigated one tool called browser use. I don't know if you heard about it, but
No.
this is based on language models, and basically, it is based on something similar like Selenium. And you basically run or read the page poem, yeah, let's say the HTML code of the page, and you can, based on that, locate some elements of this in this web page.
Mhm.
And this will allow you to do some test automation, but not as input. You basically only give it an human readable
Mhm.
phrase. Yeah. So tell it, click on this button in the screen, and based on the element description, it will be finding this element and then
Mhm.
click it using Selenium. It's
Mhm.
really interesting. I mean, I also encourage like the people who are hearing to check it out. It's really interesting. And I think that will be like the future of large language models in testing. It will be maybe more powerful. I mean, these models or tools that you can basically do UI testing much smoother.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Sometimes it reminds me of BDD, where you have like, this kind of cucumber, but you obviously still have to write a lot of code maybe to translate that. But I agree that it would make total sense to just write prompts to say, press that, expect this here, and then that could be resilient to if things move around, or, how things change. But um,
To set field.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I was wondering kind of, that's how it could be. I wonder how it is in reality. It's, similar to if you use AI to generate code, in many cases, it'll be fantastic, but you still need to check yourself just to make sure. And specifically with testing, it has to be deterministic, right? If your test, sometimes passes, even if it shouldn't, then that's not a very valuable test. So I'm curious kind of, and I'm sure there's going to happen a lot in that space. So
No, but
that's
productively, let's say, I mean, in my current project, it's more like for generating code, but not used directly in production for sure. I mean, we have to check it. We are also like writing code in our own, but it's more for improvement. Also, like working on some, let's say, language that you are not very familiar with, it will help you a lot. But
Mhm.
to test, I mean, or to run these test scripts, it's more like now exploratory thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, we didn't use it yet, but it's really interesting. I'm also thinking of introducing this into the project. but for sure you have to let's say convince the management people that it has value and they are also willing to pay for it.
Yeah, I guess there's also that. Okay, Cherif, thank you so much. This was super interesting. Thank you for sharing all the things you're doing. Super interesting, and I'm sure our listeners are going to be learning from this and hopefully good takeaways there. Thank you.
Really interesting. Thanks.
Thanks, and goodbye to everyone. And thank you, Evan, for producing. Bye-bye.
Bye.